So I was thinking of making a video guide to the leaders of all nations, but then I realized that there are just way too many nations these days, so instead I decided to make a guide to all of the leaders of nations that start with the letter A. Number 1, Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan is a very important country, but can you remember who their current president is? He was in the news a lot back in 2014 because the election that picked him was so close and controversial. His name is Ashraf Ghani. Ghani's life story as a world leader is quite interesting because in the 1970s he actually made a very conscious decision to leave Afghanistan. He emigrated to the United States to work as a professor and eventually became a US citizen. But then, after Afghanistan's fundamentalist Taliban government was overthrown in 2001, Ghani moved back to the country that he had left 25 years ago in order to be part of their new democratic government. And then, after working a few years in that capacity, he was eventually elected president, although just barely. Because Dr. Ghani is so super westernized and so educated, he can sometimes come off as a bit of a snob and a know-it-all. Considering he is a man who literally wrote the book on how to fix broken countries, he is a guy who invites a lot of criticism. But I mean, you do have to have some sympathy for him. Being president of Afghanistan kind of seems like the worst job on earth. I mean, he even said that last year.
This is the worst job on earth.
Number 2, Albania. The Prime Minister of Albania is a guy called Edi Rama. He was elected in 2013 and then re-elected in 2017. Like almost all of Albania's post-communist prime ministers, he is from the Socialist Party. Now, there are a lot of very gimmicky things about this guy. He is a former member of the Albanian national basketball team, so he is very tall, about 6'6". He is also a former artist and art professor who still likes to make creative art stuff from time to time, including these very cool doodles on his memo papers. And lastly, like most artists, Prime Minister Rama also likes to dress like a bit of a hipster. He often wears t-shirts instead of dress shirts and sneakers instead of dress shoes. Number 3, Algeria. Algeria's president is Abdelaziz Bouteflika. He has been Algeria's president for almost 20 years and has been involved in Algerian politics since the country first became independent from France in the 1960s. Nowadays, however, he is incredibly old. He has had multiple strokes and cannot really do much. He is almost never seen in public anymore, or even in private. This, as you might expect, has led to widespread speculation that he is not actually even running the country anymore, but is rather being, puppeteered by a sort of shadowy clique of people around him. The understanding is that this is not a perfect setup, but the alternative, which would be letting someone else be president, would sort of upset this very sort of delicate power balance that's going on in Algeria between like the military and the ruling party and all the other sort of big shots running the show. The status quo seems to be working out so well for all of them, in fact, that President Bouteflika is supposedly going to be seeking a 5th term next year, so let's see how that goes. Number 4 is Andorra. Andorra is a tiny country of less than 100,000 people, so it's difficult to learn too much about their leader, Antoni Marti, who they simply call El Cap de Govern, or head of the government. Marti was first elected in 2011 when his party won a landslide victory of 21 seats in Andorra's 28-seat parliament. According to his very sparse resume posted on the very sparse Andorran government website, he studied architecture in France and has been active in Andorran politics since the 1990s. That said, Marti will probably wind up being one of the most consequential Andorran leaders of recent times, only because his government was the first one to impose a national income tax. A lack of an income tax was previously one of the only reasons why anyone did anything in Andorra. But in an effort to crack down on tax evasion, the other European countries have been bullying Andorra to put an end to that for a while now. And Marti wound up being the leader who finally did in 2016. Number 5, Angola. The president of Angola is named Yalo Lorenzo. They have these wonderful Portuguese names in Angola. He hasn't been on the job very long and was only sworn in this past September. For the previous 38 years, Angola has only had one president, the dictatorial José Eduardo dos Santos, who was the head of the revolutionary Marxist party that has been the only party to lead Angola since its 1975 independence from Portugal. But by 2017, dos Santos was getting quite old, and so he announced that his chosen successor would be the defense minister, General Lorenzo. He was made the new candidate of the revolutionary Marxist party and was subsequently ratified in the next election. General Lorenzo is a longtime Angolan military leader who served as an officer during Angola's big, long, messy post-independence civil war, which was also one of the major proxy battles of the Cold War. The Angolan government was backed by the Russians, and as a result, General Lorenzo actually spent some time being educated and trained in the Soviet Union as a result. As Angola's first new president in decades, there is a lot of expectation that he will be the guy who cleans up what has become a very corrupt and sclerotic government. And surprisingly enough, there does seem to be some evidence that that's happening. Okay, government number 6, Antigua and Barbuda. The Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda has the name of a Disney character, and I bet you can't guess which one. It is Gaston. Gaston Brown is his name, and he is a very popular guy over there, having won big landslide victories in 2014 and 2018. Brown went to school in England and is a very rich guy, having worked for a lot of big business interests before getting involved in politics, which is kind of ironic since he is also leader of the Socialist Party. Although I know that politics in the Caribbean can be kind of weird that way. Prime Minister Brown is 51 and has a wife who is less than half his age. She is actually a member of Parliament as well and is the granddaughter of the first Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda and the niece of the second one. So Brown has really married into some local royalty. Okay, number 7 is Argentina. Argentina elected its current president in 2015. His name is Mauricio Macri. As you might be able to tell from that name, he is part of Argentina's sizable Italian community, his father being an immigrant from there. Macri is a very wealthy former soccer team manager who has used his considerable money to finance the creation of a new political party to shake up the old crooked party system. So, you know, one of those type of guys. He is considered very pro-capitalism, which makes him a big break from Argentina's previous 2 presidents, this very left-wing husband and wife duo. But like so many Latin American presidents before him, Macri has also had to work hard to ensure he is not just seen as a tool of the rich. Okay, now we are up to country number 8, Armenia. So the head of Armenia is Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, but he has only been in power for a few days. He was sworn in on May the 8th. Pashinyan is this sort of dynamic outsider character who has been a leading figure in these big street protests that have gripped that country over the last few weeks. See, since Armenia became independent from the Soviet Union in 1991, it has basically only been governed by one party, the Republicans, who a lot of people have grown sick of. In April, Armenia's president of the last 10 years started to engage in some constitutional gimmicks to let him stay in power even longer, and a lot of people did not go for this. So there was big mass public demonstrations and all the rest. The president agreed to step down, and the Republican-dominated parliament elected Pashinyan in his place, you know, just to show that they were down with the changing times. Nikol Pashinyan has been this sort of professional, full-time opposition figure in Armenia over the last 20 years, publishing opposition newspapers and engaging in sort of creative protest stunts, like walking all the way across the country. After spending so much time complaining from the outside, I imagine expectations will be pretty high now that he's on the inside. Number 9 is good old Australia. Their Prime Minister is Malcolm Turnbull. Turnbull initially got the job in 2015 by muscling out the previous boss of his party, which is how a lot of Australian prime ministers seem to come to power. But then he was elected in his own right in 2016. Turnbull is a conservative, although the Australians, much like the Europeans, insist on calling conservatives liberals. They also wear hats on their feet and hamburgers eat people. Turnbull is an extremely rich man who was a very successful lawyer and businessman before he got into politics. He has tried to use this as a way of fostering a close friendship with President Trump, as we learned about in that infamous leaked phone call from a few months back where they got into a big fight. An interesting thing about Turnbull is that he is very opposed to the British monarchy. In 1999, Australia had a failed referendum on separating itself from the British royal family, and Turnbull was head of the yes side. Number 10 is Austria, or as the Austrians themselves call it, Österreich. The Chancellor of Austria is Mr. Sebastian Kurz. Kurz is famous for exactly 2 things. One is being very young. He is only 31 years old, which I believe makes him the youngest ever leader of a Western democracy. And 2 is being very right-wing. His coalition government includes politicians from the Austrian Freedom Party, which has historically been considered one of the more toxic far-right parties in Europe. But, you know, While ongoing controversy about migrants and Islam seems to be moving the European political center of gravity a fair bit these days, Kurz is often held up as representing a new generation of European conservative leadership, in more ways than one, I guess. And lastly, we have the president of Azerbaijan. Now, remember good old Nikol Pashinyan? When he was leading his protests against the old president, one of his stock lines was that we cannot let Armenia become the next Azerbaijan. And what did he mean by that? Well, Azerbaijan has had the same president for more than 15 years now, Ilham Aliyev. And Ilham Aliyev became president in 2003 after his father died, who had been president for the 10 years before that. The current vice president of Azerbaijan, meanwhile, is President Aliyev's wife. They were elected last month to their 4th term with 86% of the vote. So yeah, I guess you could say this place is not exactly a role model of respectable government. So anyway, that is a summary of all of the world leaders who come from countries that start with the letter A. Let me know in the comments what you think of this video and if you would like me to make videos like this for the rest of the alphabet. By my estimate, that would take about 10 more videos, but don't worry, I wouldn't do them all at once. I leave that kind of thing to the professionals.